all the electronics, all the communication, everything was run through his umbilical cord, which was severed. So the only thing he had that could give him any sort of illumination were flare. The fall off, him walking into a complete black space, shooting it very wide, and he's going to be this big in the frame so that the audience will be able to see that there's this vast sea of nothingness, that he's got no hope. If you're by yourself underwater at night and there's nothing else around you, you're still not going to see anything else in the distance. But we did keep the overhead on quite low, just so there was somewhat of a detail around his body, because otherwise you're going to see someone's head. You do have to be able to see something.
Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course follow me on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by cinematographer Ian Seabrook, who recently did the underwater photography for Last Breath. How did you get into the business of underwater photography?
I came at it from a stills background. I got certified on the Great Barrier Reef, and I was the only one on the dive trip to rent a small little plexiglass underwater camera casing that fit one of those disposable, windable cameras. And it was slide film. I knew enough to shoot slide film because the couple of years prior, I had sort of just been diving into photography, darkroom, black and white, fixed lenses, that kind of thing. So it was enthusiasm, but no one in my circle, or it wasn't really readily available, any knowledge on underwater photography. You basically, I learned from looking at National Geographic magazines, which my parents had, and so that fueled that interest, and then basically did several trips to the California Channel Islands and a few other places. And I mean, when I took those first photographs, I still have them. They're of course not very good, but and they show a lot of bleached coral, which at that point was, I think the time to dive around the Great Barrier Reef was probably in the 60s or the 1950s, when the marine life was a lot more plentiful and the coral was a lot less bleached, as it were. But anyway, I'm sure it's a lot different now from when I was there. But yeah, so and just examining the photos, I'm like, well, how can I make those better? Or it was more interesting that I actually was able to take photographs underwater. So I kept pursuing that. And then kind of simultaneously, I kind of got into the film industry as an unpaid intern in Los Angeles. And I worked on that film, the American remake of La Femme Nikita, which was called Point of No Return, with Bridget Fonda. Never saw the film, but I did see La Femme Nikita, like many other people, which was an amazing film. But so I did a few of those. I did some low budget non-union things because I wasn't in the union at that point, and it was difficult to get experience. So I just kind of kept doing that, and I would also go hang out at Hydroflex, which is a camera and lighting rental house for underwater equipment. And it was back then it was basically a small little machine shop, a tiny little machine shop. It wasn't what it is right now, because everything expands in the world, of course. But so kept at it, and while I was a clapper loader, then I moved up to focus puller, and I started assisting Pete Romano, who ran Hydroflex. He still runs it, but he had a very accomplished resume. He worked on The Abyss and a couple of James Bond films and Alien Resurrection. And so we worked on a film called Insomnia together, which was Chris Nolan's first studio picture for Warner Brothers. And that was a great experience. They were all good experiences, but it's just the more jobs that came in, the more experience you got, because they weren't all the same. There was always something different about them. So, and then eventually if you are aiming at doing one particular job, let's say you want to be a Steadicam operator, well, a lot of clapper loaders somehow buy the rig. They manage to buy a rig that someone wants to sell or whatever, and then they just keep practicing. So it's not that it's obviously it's the same with any discipline, but with underwater, if you want to do it, you have to actually be in the water diving. And how do you get access to the equipment when it's so expensive and you have to have a multi-million-dollar rental insurance policy in order to take the equipment out? So it's a little bit of a catch-22. I think it's easier now that people have access to things like GoPros or housings for their phones that they can maybe start to play around, but that equipment is absolutely not the same as the cinema quality film cinema or the digital cinema housings. So, but then again, you look at something like My Octopus Teacher, which is shot on an A7. So maybe sometimes it doesn't necessarily matter, but it does matter what the content is. I think that's most important thing. So I basically kept at it, and then the first underwater job I shot was a Bud Light commercial. And then the first film project I shot was a Hellraiser sequel. I don't know if it was Hellraiser 4 or 5. I'm not sure which one it was, but anyway, and again, I was the focus puller on the show, and they had some underwater work, and I proposed that I was the one to do it because they certainly didn't have the budget to pay for an underwater DP to come in and shoot that. And so and I had the support of the director, Rick Boda, who also knew that I was really passionate about it, and that I would put everything into it, and I would do an adequate job at it. It wouldn't be a complete write-off. But on that job, I experienced something that I have come up against numerous times, which is talent in the water not being comfortable. And in that particular instance, it was the double whammy of having the talent in a car underwater. So that can cause severe phobia and the ability not to escape quickly, because if you're either in the scene, you're supposed to be seat belted in, the car goes off a bridge or something like that. A lot of the sequences are somewhat similar like that. But so I had to figure out how to shoot with her not wanting to participate whatsoever. And so that taught me how to think quickly, and we can't just say we can't do it because we've got the entire unit there, and so shooting it with a stunt double, we did a little bit of that, but you still need close-ups. And so how do we do that? So then I had to think, you need a door frame, you need a window, you need some kind of cover over top of them to make it look like they're in the car. So basically, put her in a shallower area where she was comfortable. We did put like a duvetine cover or a chloroplast or something, some kind of solid over top of her. That wasn't, you weren't going to see it floating around. Yeah. And then we basically C-standed, that's not really an adverb, but we put we pulled the door off the car, and with a bunch of C-stands, actually bolted the whole thing into place so that she was able to comfortably act and while still be petrified that she was in the water, but she was not physically in the car. And then I just used a really, really long lens, which I typically don't really use 85 or 100 millimeter lenses for this kind of work, but that's what I had to do because I had to show there was complete lack of vehicle space in the background. So not to say that I've come up again with that scenario, but I've not had to deal with it in that severe way, and that we got like 1 hour left and we still have to get this shot. So so it was like everybody, all hands on deck, pull the door off, get it up. And so, that was good experience.
I've been a camera person for 30 years, and I fell in love with cinema. I heard there was free film school in France, and I wanted to get into the French film school. I really didn't know anything at the time, but I knew at least how to take pictures. So I said, I'll try for the image department. And then when I miraculously got into the French film school, I fell in love with working with the camera. You're following what's going to be in the movie. So that immediacy that the camera allows is what I loved from the beginning. I'm Kirsten Johnson, and this is my course about documentary cinematography.
I would love to know with Last Breath, because it seems like, you know, a lot of the stuff that's happening underwater is incredibly dark. Not in the sense of like it was shot dark, but like you're playing from a story perspective with, I guess, people's fear of the depth. And so there's a lot, sort of like a quick fall off of light. And I'm wondering, how did you like approach lighting this to create that sort of effect?
That story, essentially, Chris Lemon's, there was an accident. For those people who don't know or haven't seen the film, or I'm not sure when this is going to air, but anyway, so there was an accident and he was separated from his diving bell, and he had to survive on a very limited supply of a bailout bottle that he had attached to his body. And all the electronics, all the communication, everything was attached to his was run through his umbilical cord, which was severed. So the only thing he had that could give him any sort of illumination were flares. And so in the film, the narrative adaptation of this project, we knew that he was just going to be using, these flares, and that they have a certain lifespan. They don't last for 4 minutes, right? Some of them are only 30 seconds or 15 seconds or a minute or just under a minute. So the fall off, him walking into a complete black space. There were discussions about shooting it very wide, and he's going to be this big in the frame so that the audience will be able to see that there's this vast sea of nothingness that he's got no hope of finding his way back to his diving manifold, the workstation that he's working on. And I mean, how do you show just blackness? You got to have some. Normally, if someone's lost in a forest, or if you take The Revenant, for example, okay, they waited and shot that at dusk or dawn. They had beautiful light. It was a gorgeous looking picture, and it's a small figure on a vast white sort of landscape. So that's an easy silhouette. This is kind of the reverse of that. So, but we don't have any. There's no kelp forest. There's nothing physically in the water apart from him to illustrate that he's lost. So I figured the light fall off from that, because the true light fall off from the real magnesium flares are very bright. But again, if you're by yourself underwater at night and there's nothing else around you, you're still not going to see anything else in the distance. So we did have an overhead light system in place. Now, obviously, moonlight would not reach that depth. It took place 100 meters or 300 feet below the surface. So there's no way to be any atmospheric light that would penetrate that deep. So, but we still needed to be able to see not only him, but before the accident, with his work companion Dave. There's an ROV, a remote operated vehicle, kind of like an underwater drone, that's also kind of with them as they do their work, and that acted as a bit of a backlight. But as far as the fall off, while he's by himself, we had a special effects flare that was battery operated, and the batteries would only last so long, so you had to keep an eye on the illumination there. And then we also augmented that with some Astera tubes. But we did also keep the overhead on quite low, just so there was somewhat of a detail around his helmet and his body per se, because otherwise you're going to see someone's head and you're going to see nothing else. Maybe the torch that he's got in his hand, but you do have to be able to see something, right? So if that answers the question.
How, did you ever have that? I can't remember what it's called, but the fear of depth of water when you're down low and not knowing what's there. But have you ever had that sort of fear when you're diving?
When I'm diving, no. I mean, I had it like every kid had it when you go into a lake and there's reeds or something, and they kind of wrap around your ankle, and you're sort of like, oh, and of course, seeing Jaws 100 times doesn't help either. It doesn't matter if it's a lake, and there's no way that a shark could actually ever live in a lake, or a great white shark would actually be in that lake, or a river or whatever, but it still doesn't shut your brain off in that way. But the fear of being I've done plenty of night diving, and for this picture, Last Breath, even though it was a film production, not a pleasure dive, the entire thing was shot at night. We had to be on a night schedule, not dissimilar from what James Cameron and co did on The Abyss, just because the size of the tank, they had no cover for it. And also when we started prepping in May, we started prepping in March, but we kind of did some tests in May. And the local gentleman who was in charge of building the scaffolding, David Benici, scaffold genius, he said, like, it's very, very windy down here. It's almost gale force winds, and you can't have any lifts in the air because it's gonna be, you have to take them down. So we had to figure out another way to have a top source of light. So between my gaffer, Aaron Keating, and myself, we figured that we would submerge the lights. So we had to sort of put our brains together and innovate something that isn't really typically done that often, but we had to solve, again, same thing, you had to solve the problem. You can't say, well, I guess we can't shoot then. It doesn't work that way. So you do have to come up with some solutions. But as far as the fear, I mean, everybody on the crew knew, and all the support divers, everybody in the water knew that if they had fears of working at night, which most, I guess, professional divers, whether they do or not, they don't really admit it, but it's one thing for the talent to go and have these hard hats on with surface applied air, so they're completely dependent on the dive tender on the surface. It's not like you have your own equipment and your own air source, and you're mobile and it can go. I mean, accidents still happen with equipment as well, but they had to have complete reliance on the dive tender on the surface. And if they had fears, I mean, I've been in situations where there's a handful of actors who have been in perilous sort of situations that, even vehicles like Charlize Theron or Ryan Reynolds in any kind of overhead environment, and they were able to actually act and suppress whatever fear they had, so that, yes, they're capable of doing all the things that they're required to do, but they're also on top of that doing their performance. Which, if it is to be afraid, then they don't really have to act. But you don't see the fear on their face. Other people are not, so they're a bit more trepidatious about it, I suppose.
How do you, or I guess, do you decide? Like, do you always shoot in like a tank for a feature film, or is there times where you would go into the ocean? Like, how do you make that decision?
It depends on the project. Everything is project based. The tank environment is controllable in temperature, sea conditions, lighting, depth to a certain extent. You can, in the open ocean, you're at the mercy of the sea conditions. You're at the mercy of current. Like in Indiana Jones, we were told when we were in Sicily that at this one point there's one location we were shooting at, that the currents come in around 2:30 and they really rip. So we had to be wrapped and starting to immobilize the equipment back to the boats, the support boats, by that time. And I kept looking at my watch, and we were still working. And so far, everything was kind of going okay. And then basically at 2:40, I noticed it was a bit more difficult for people to hold still, and even the camera became a little bit unstable. So, and we knew that we were pushing it by going 10 minutes over, but it literally was like clockwork. It came in at 2:30, and it was like, everybody get out. So, and that doesn't mean that everybody was in danger. It just means that it becomes a bit unmanageable because people are not able to stay in one spot, or the lights or the cables are floating everywhere, or whatever we were doing. So it's project dependent. Rivers, lakes, depends if they're glacial fed, if they have water clarity. Water clarity is another big problem. I mean, it's like the most paramount problem that we have to deal with if the water is uncloudy, which happened a lot on Last Breath, because the tank in Malta, which is, I think, the largest open standing tank in Europe, that it's not covered or anything, but it's right on the edge of the Mediterranean. So basically they draw the water supply in from the Mediterranean. They don't treat it. they don't chlorinate it, they don't heat it. It's basically just like you're diving in the ocean. So when we did some tests, the particulate was all over the place. And so the lights, when you had lights on, because the divers in this film have headlamps and they have some lights inside the helmet as well, to illuminate their faces. And any other lights, like the lights on the ROV or the lights on the substation, they were just blooming and glowing. And I just said, we can't have this. I know that in some point it becomes, I like to kind of blend it between being reality based, looking realistic, but then also having some, pleasant nature with which to look at it. So if it's just this horrible storm the entire time, there has to be some levity for the audience. And also they have to be able to see things. Oh, the movie was okay, but it just looked like this murk and pea soup they were kind of swimming. Then no one's going to sit there for an hour and a half to watch that. So I did bring a chlorination system over from the UK. I did have the tank cleaned. It had never been cleaned in, I don't know, 30, 40 years. So, and I got in there and cleaned it because there was some hesitation to do that. But I knew that we had to start clean and as clean as we could. And then if things came in, like we basically had to drain the tank a couple times. And anytime we refilled it, we were at the mercy of whatever the sea conditions were at that time. So if there had been a storm 3 days before, so the storm comes in and 3 days after, then we want to pull the water in, we run the risk of it being murky, cloudy. And again, and you're either locked into just shooting close-ups. It would depend on how bad we had, there's a call sheet, work order for the day. But if the water clarity was no good, then we had to kind of change course a bit, and then you just make note of all the bits that you owe. That doesn't matter if it's in Malta. It can be in a self-contained tank, not necessarily in a swimming pool, because you tend to not have that issue because it's a running operation where there's regular chlorination happening, or bromine, or whatever the chemical they're using is. So, but yeah, the water clarity is a big issue for sure.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now.
Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
What would you say was the biggest issue you had or biggest problem? Because you talked about figuring out solutions or figuring out, or solving problems. Like, what would you say was one of the bigger problems you had to solve on this production?
Well, for one thing, myself and the crew that I brought over from the UK, we were the most experienced on the project. I'm sorry. And we did have, as far as the diving unit is concerned, we were the most experienced because there were a lot of people on the job who had not done a production like this before. So on top of the fact that I normally do, or any underwater cameraman typically does, the job of 11 to 12 people. They have composed, they have to, shoot it, they have to operate the camera, light, grip, set deck, work the special effects, not necessarily work the special effects, but manage them within the frame, keep everybody out of the shot, make sure that the actors are safe. You're the first line in front of the actors, of the talent. No different from, some directors like to operate the camera because they want to be close to the talent. Well, I mean, I'm the first person that's close to them, even though they do have a safety diver with them. But so there were a lot of challenges with that. The budget also on this picture was not, we also didn't have a time frame. The budget and the time frame were the biggest challenges, I think, because I think the film was under scheduled. and also it was under budgeted as well. So you're not suddenly going to get more money. You're not suddenly going to get more time if they've locked a schedule in and they've locked a budget and you have to work under those parameters. So we did work all nights, and then on the weekends I was basically either in meetings or watching dailies. I never really had much time off, and I kind of knew that going in, and I knew that I would have to be wearing quite a few hats and organizing the underwater unit, and I directed the second unit as well. And then I also took over shooting the main unit of the picture once the unit moved to Scotland. So I was pretty involved with virtually every aspect of it. The costumes that came in, the wardrobe that came in, we had to triple check that was accurate. The initial plans were to build diving helmets, to have them custom built, and that kind of didn't really go well. So then we had to get other helmets that would work. So it's solving the problem. It's not just saying, well, that didn't work, I don't know what we're going to do, and then waiting for someone else to make the decision. Of course, it's a collaborative business, and so everybody's input who has experience, I think, is valid. And if you don't have experience, then maybe it's good to absorb what other people who have been through this before as best you can. But there were people like David Brooks, the producer. He fought really hard to try to get the picture advancing forward, and there were a lot of roadblocks. Every single department got kicked in the balls, per se, but and we all just managed to soldier on. So there were problems there were electrolysis problems on some of the lighting equipment that got damaged. We had bulbs implode underwater. There were no accidents of any kind, but managing all of that and then still trying to be able to get to sleep is that's a good that's a good challenge right there. So you're tired and you want to lie down, but you're like, okay, so tomorrow I have to it's all these things, right? So, but so
I have one last question for you. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Because I don't have cable, and sometimes I just put YouTube on. And I watch sometimes I guess that's a guilty pleasure. It's not really exciting to talk about, but I can certainly go down a YouTube wormhole and watch videos of things that are ridiculous like anybody else. So because I think maybe I used to watch Baywatch Hawaii when I was I don't know, whenever that was on, because I'm like, oh, I'm watching it because there's underwater work, and then my wife would be like, yeah, that you're watching Pamela Anderson is what you're watching, or whoever. I think maybe she wasn't on it at that point. There was someone else, but if they watch Hawaii, I don't think she was on that show. So it was something like that. I was, or Hawaii 5-0, the reboot of Hawaii 5-0. That's a good one. I actually liked watching that because I wanted to watch Hawaii. I wanted to watch the scenery. The script and the acting, of course, was just, they were appropriate for whatever the show was. But I was really excited when that came out, and I kept going, it's pretty good, and people are like, what? So I had to keep my mouth shut about that. So,
well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
It's wonderful to be on your show. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course on Instagram at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.